So it's a great joy to be here this evening. As Aditya introduced myself, I'm Nayaswami Devarshi. I've lived at Ananda Village in California for many years. And right now I'm traveling through India and on my way back to California at the end of January. And I'll be returning to India in June or July to permanently live in India in Gurgaon, and I'll be traveling and hoping to come here again and again over the years. This evening's satsang, in a way, is going to be a continuation of a theme that we've been having at the Ananda Ashram the last few days. It's still the first day of the new year, so I'm going to talk some more about that and about some ways that we can change the next year and grab control of it, but starting by leaving the past year behind, and in fact leaving our past karma behind, because I think so often people feel weighted down by the past, decisions they've made, choices they've made in life, mistakes they've made, sins if you think in terms of sin, and even from past lifetimes, mistakes that we've made can come as samskars and inclinations that cause us to behave erratically or not in the right ways. And so one of the things that Paramahansa Yoganandaji gave us with starting off the new year was 1, leaving the past behind, 2, how to change the coming year and how to change yourself. And I'm going to talk about both 2 different aspects of that. And tonight is just part 1. You're going to have to come next week, next Thursday, for part 2, which I'll talk about. And next week is going to be more the practical applications of the science of yoga, and especially the science of yoga as Krishna gave to Arjuna, and as Arjuna, in his form as Paramahansa Yogananda, gave to all of us with the teachings of Kriya Yoga. When our Guru Yoganandaji talked about leaving the past behind, every new year he would really do a lot of talking about leaving the past behind and starting afresh. It's almost like a complete reboot of your operating system when Windows, if you use Windows, gets all bogged down with all kinds of software and you have to restart, and it sort of restarts afresh. And a new year is a really good time to do this, and it's a good time to look completely afresh at your life, at how you can change things. And if you're unable to leave the past behind, that's very, very difficult to do, because these past baggage kind of influence our current thinking and weigh us down in that way. Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, he gave the most direct and succinct and really deepest advice, and it's very, very simple, on how to actually rid yourself of past karma, how to be free of past karma. It's interesting that past karma, again, let's think of it in terms of mistakes that we've made and regrets that we have. We think in terms of we're holding on to that karma and those regrets, or the karma is holding on to us. And Krishna gave the most succinct and direct advice on how to be free of all past karma, all past samskaras, and basically wipe the operating system completely clean and give us a fresh start. And next week I'm going to talk about what to do with that fresh start in the coming year. Krishna in chapter 18, stanza 66 says, "Forsaking all other dharmas, remember me alone. I will free you from all sin. Do not grieve." And so he's saying that devotion is the way to free ourselves from past karma. It's very simple. Yoganandaji put it a different way. And he also talked about cosmic law in this context. And that's, again, what I'm going to be talking about next week, which is more the science aspect of the spiritual path. He said, connect all your activities with God. Follow the law with devotion, and there cannot be any failure. There cannot be any sidetracking. For remember that much is forgiven to that person who has devotion. If you have devotion, you shall be free. Follow the law with devotion. When you do your best according to the principles of concentration and meditation, at the same time that you are devoted to your Father, then the result comes. For God measures through law, and yet he is beyond all laws. In devotion, God surrenders himself. It gives the finishing touches. But devotion without law is not honored by God. Law must be followed. Spiritual law of emancipation plus devotion are necessary. You are a child of the divine. You are a prince of the cosmos. Don't treat yourself like a beggar, but like a child of God. To one who loves much, Jesus said, much is forgiven. And so Jesus and Krishna both are in agreement with this. I heard Swami Priyananda talk many times over the years. Something that he said which was very interesting because he had a very intellectual mind when he came onto the spiritual path. But something he said that love for God is the most practical thing that you can do. And it was very interesting to hear him say that. And tonight I'm going to talk more about that, next week about the more, quote, really practical things that we can do that God and the Gurus gave us. But I want to just share something that when I first came to Ananda Village, I moved there in 1977, as this is in California, and there was about 900 acres of land there. And the summer before I moved there, the entire community was burnt down by a forest fire. It burnt about 800 of the 900 acres. It burned all the homes and houses and buildings except for, I think, 3. And so when I moved to Ananda Village, it was literally a wasteland. It was just ashes, charred ashes everywhere you could see. The only thing standing were the charred, blackened remains and skeletons of dead trees. And the people that were there were a bunch of extremely unskilled, very impractical people. They were mostly what you would call in that era hippies, which I would probably include myself in that description. But they all had one thing that was very inspiring to me. That was an intense yearning and devotion and love for God. And again, someone who was very practical, quote, minded, would look at that scenario. And here I was making my life decision, my career choice, how I was going to spend the rest of my life. And I was going to be doing it on 900 charred, blackened acres. No money. People had no money there. We had no skills. We didn't know how to build or create or do any of these things. What we did have was this intense yearning for the spiritual path. We had this intense yearning for our Guru Yogananda Ji. And somehow that intense love, that intense yearning created this extraordinary community. And I don't know how many people saw the Finding Happiness movie that was shown here. Did people see that? You know, that movie, I'm so glad so many people saw it because over the years when I try to describe Ananda Village to people, it sounds too good to be true. You explain what it is and how beautiful it is and the people, and it sounds like a fairy tale. It really does. And then you see that movie, and that movie in fact does depict Ananda Village the way it really is. And it really is that extraordinary and that amazing. And every time I look back to 37, 38 years ago, and I think these people helped to create this, and nothing makes sense. It's like the math does not add up. The practicality does not add up. But in fact, as Swamiji very often said, love for God and this intense yearning, and I'm not talking about just the sentiment of love for God and that sweet feeling that comes sometimes and comes and goes, but I'm talking about what Yogananda talked about, intense yearning and devotion and love for God. It does something very interesting. And you'll see this with a mother who loves the child. And you might say that the love of a mother is impractical. I mean, what practical benefits does it give? But in fact, you'll find that a mother who truly loves the child understands the child when the child is sick. It tunes into what the child needs, and it isn't always a straightforward answer. It's a mother's intuition. And what Swamiji has taught over the years is that this type of divine love has an innate intelligence that knows what to do. And this is how Ananda was built over the years. Yes, people had to learn certain skills, but we didn't hire skilled people to create these things. I had the experience in 1996 or 1997 of launching the Ananda.org website. Now, I had no computer training, much less training in HTML and website development. I had none of that. At the time, we had a website with 10 web pages. And I learned everything just because I had this intense yearning and love to share, to give to others, and share my sacred teachings. And that yearning and that desire created the magnetism and the energy to learn everything I needed to learn. And 7 years later, my wife, who some of you have met over the years, who left the body a few years ago, she took over the website for me. She had no training also in computers or any of that stuff. And she took it even further in terms of development. So you see this extraordinary website that gives generously to millions of people all over the world with all this extraordinary content. And these things were done by people who had no skill and very little practical abilities, but had this intense yearning and love for God. And when you have that, Swami Kriyananda says that everything else will follow. This is what Christ said. Christ said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." Now, it doesn't mean we're oblivious to the practical realities. We did learn the skills. I went to school to learn HTML code and all the things that were needed for that. And I learned what I needed to learn. But you will also find that the very practical side of this, the side of meditation, which I'm going to talk more about next week, we have a physician. I'm just going to touch on it this week. But we have a physician at Ananda, Dr. Peter Van Houten. And I sincerely hope Dr. Aditya gets to meet him someday, because they're very much of like mind and have a lot to share with each other. And Dr. Peter, as we call him, he's a Kriyacharya and a Kriya teacher at Ananda. When he was going to medical school, he was part of some of the very first scientific studies on the effects of meditation on the brain. And he was just a medical student. He wasn't all that interested in meditation, but he was actually one of the subjects, and also one of the people who studied the meditators. And he said he noticed something really interesting. He said that when they were doing the studies of these longtime meditators, they were all such positive, happy people. It was really surprising. He said it was uncanny, because he'd been part of other studies. And you're having people wait for 3 hours while they try to fix the equipment that tests the brain, and they're sticking electrodes in people's heads and shaving parts of the hair off and doing all these things. And he said these people were, without exception, they were joyful, positive, even-minded, and cheerful. He really took note of that. And he found that, in fact, meditation does change the brain. This is something that Yoganandaji said in the 1920s, when doctors were saying that the brain could not be changed. Yoganandaji was saying that the brain is plastic and can be influenced and changed. And our physician said that this inspired him to learn meditation, because what they have learned over the years is that the simple practice of meditation, concentration at the point between the eyebrows, changes especially the frontal lobes of the brain, sends blood to that part of the brain, and makes people more compassionate, more kind, which are the qualities that are centered in that part of the brain. And interestingly, Dr. Peter said that when he came to Ananda, he didn't have devotion for love for God. He came because it was this very practical thing, that meditation changed the brain and would change people and make him like these other people who were even-minded and cheerful. What he discovered, very interestingly over the years, is that the practice of Kriya Yoga, the practice of meditation, awakened deep, deep devotion and yearning for God in him. And you see this in him now. He's a doctor saint in our clinic. We have a rural clinic that serves thousands and thousands of people in a very rural area who have a lot of poverty and alcoholism and drug abuse. And he is just literally, I would say he's a saint, the way he serves these people, loves them unconditionally, and he's a different person. So this is how practical meditation is and how it's changing us. And again, I'll talk about these things more next week. This week I just want to talk about what it means and how to develop this intense love for God, because Yogananda essentially said it's the most important thing that we can do. And it's really the foundation of the spiritual path. When we build the foundation upon that deep devotion, everything else follows. I'm going to read what Yoganandaji said specifically about that. A disciple said to him, "It all seems hopelessly complex, Master. Just think how many laws are passed in a single year by the government of one country. The laws of the universe, then, must number infinity." The Master, chuckling, said, "Really, it isn't quite so complicated as it seems. In the Bhagavad Gita, the forces of evil are described as many, while those on the side of good number only a few. Jesus Christ, too, described the way to perdition as a broad highway, but he said, 'Straight is the gate, and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life. The ways of error are endlessly winding, but the way out of error is direct. A few simple rules will suffice, and the most important of these is simply this: love God.'" So I'm going to talk this week a little bit more just about how to develop that. because there are some very simple and practical ways we can do this. And you'll find that when you build the coming year on a sense of deeper devotion and awakening devotion, and apply these practical things, which I'll be talking about next time, on top of that foundation, you'll find that it's the quickest way to change your life. And I can say this from many, many years of working with Kriya Yoga students and seeing what is effective in the majority of those students. And it comes when people combine, as Yoganandaji said, Kriya Yoga plus devotion. It's not even that we practice technique at one time and devotion at the other, but it's almost in a very unusual way and almost a remarkably unique way that Yoganandaji taught, that it's a marriage of science and technique with the deepest yearning and love for God. So how do we awaken that in some very simple and practical ways? I've been experimenting the last few years with something that I wrote a blog on the ananda.org website about this. And the title of the blog is sort of a strange title for a blog because it connects two words that seem sort of different from each other, and it is devotion as a habit. And we think of habits as just mechanical things that we do. But I've done some very interesting experiments with developing devotion as a habit. And what I've done, and I would just really encourage people to experiment with that this year as sort of a New Year's resolution, as a way of really changing your life, and you'll find that I guarantee it will change your life, the way you develop these things. I started finding, for one thing, different activities in my daily life that caused irritation or upset or fear. An example is chronic pain, which I've had to deal with at various times. And what I found was that I developed the habit, and you can do it. A habit is simply using willpower to put out energy and acting in a certain way. And when you do that enough times, it creates a momentum and an energy that it carries its own weight after a while, and it becomes easier to do these things. And so what I did was, one of them, when I experienced chronic pain, and sometimes fairly intense, the type that would cause fairly extreme dismay or upset or nausea and dizziness and all kinds of side effects, rather than responding with fear or with concern or alarm or the wish that this wasn't happening, I used my willpower and conscious energy to turn it to God, to turn it to deep devotion for God. And in the beginning it was a little bit difficult, but over time I found that it was actually very easy, and it was actually very enjoyable at times. Amazingly enough, I actually experienced intense physical pain turning to intense divine joy. It's actually possible to do that. Some other things that I did, which were actually more fun in a way, I played a game, which was, I wanted to see when I would wake up in the morning, how quickly I could turn my mind to God. Because as the mind's coming out of subconsciousness, it drifts, and you finally start to wake up, and maybe it's 10 minutes before you kind of get it. And so it's just a fun game. How quickly, as I'm coming awake, can I do it before I'm fully conscious, while I'm still subconscious and just barely awakening? And it's really a lot of fun. And you'll find in the middle of the night when you wake up, just try to do this, and you'll find again, it becomes a habit that starts repeating itself, and then it finally starts becoming more and more natural, and something that just becomes a daily part of what you do. Here's a few other ways that I did it. Was just finding simple things that you do every day, that you do mechanically or absent-mindedly, brushing your teeth, starting the car, putting your shoes on. Use those also as a trigger to pause mentally and offer your love for God and call to the Lord of the universe, I offer you my love, I want you to be with me. And you'll find that, again, every time you turn on the key on the car, you turn that key on to that deep divine connection once it becomes a habit. So play this game, experiment with it, and you'll find that if that is the foundation of your spiritual life, everything else will follow. Because again, when you have that intense desire and yearning, then that's really what creates the extreme avidness and desire to meditate, to do the energization exercises every day, to practice Kriya Yoga. And when these two things are combined, it really is quite extraordinary, the power that they have. Swamiji, over the years, he talked about this a lot. He also said that those who have deep devotion, it's a beautiful article on the Ananda website, where he talks about love for God being very practical. He said those that have the deepest devotion, he said they will never leave the spiritual path or fail spiritually, because he said that everyone stumbles on the spiritual path, everyone trips over their shoelaces or over their own feet or their attachments and desires. But he said that when you have that intense yearning, you will always pick yourself up and you will reach back up to the Lord of the universe. And as Swamiji often said in his last years, when you lift one hand up to God, God lowers two hands down to pick you up. And so this is one aspect of the spiritual path that I think we don't talk about enough because it seems so amorphous and it's hard to pin it down. But again, these are some very practical things you can do. And you'll find that when you practice the techniques of meditation with this extreme yearning and desire, you'll find that, as our Guru said, Kriya Yoga plus devotion works like mathematics. It cannot fail. And really he was saying scientific technique of meditation and these very practical applications combined with that deep desire produces an equation that is really extraordinary. He said it works like mathematics. So next week I'll talk more about some of the practical applications of this. But experiment with leaving the past behind, offering it all to the divine. Yogananda, we were listening to a recording on the way here, and it's something that he did repeatedly, which was, he said, give all of your faults to God. And he really got into God's face. It was one way of putting it. I don't know if that's an expression that's used here in India, but he really got after God and blamed God for creating him. And he said, that's how I look at God. I tell the Lord of the universe, I didn't ask to be created. You created me against my will. It wasn't my choice. Free me. That's your responsibility. All of my mistakes are your fault because you created me. Again, I didn't ask for this. I take it further when I talk to God and I say, you didn't train me in any of this, you just threw me out. What kind of mother would do that to her children? And you have so many children. Why are you continuing to do this? And Yogananda said, talk to God with that type of freedom. Obviously lovingly, not scoldingly. But you'll find that if you develop that pure, simple relationship of the child, you'll find that really that relationship develops much more deeply. I think adults generally, maybe more specifically people in the West, tend to intellectualize what devotion is. And it's really simple. It's not even prayers and words. You get a child, an infant, who's fallen in the mud and is covered with mud, and it approaches its mother. And all it has to do is stand in front of the mother and lift its hands up and say, Ma, and the mother will pick it up. And that's how simple and pure and easy and natural also devotion is. So experiment with these things, build this foundation more and more deeply in the coming year, and you'll find that when you add the practical components of spiritual life, meditation, the science of energization and all these things our gurus gave us, you'll find that it's going to take you very, very, very far in this life. So may the gurus and God bless our efforts this year.